Yeah, I do.
So
Yeah.
shoot, fortunately, I had a good recording, or a recording in the material that we covered, even though we covered it a little differently, but it was still the same stuff there. All right. Okay, it's recording, so we got to talk nicely here. We're in a stupid joke of the night. After church service, an obviously embarrassed woman met the pastor at the back of the church, as you're going out the glorifying the worm. She says to him, I hope you didn't take it personally, Pastor, when my husband got up and walked out of the middle of your sermon. Says, well, I try not to let things like that bother me. There's kids and ever, but I was wondering if he was okay. Oh, yeah, he's okay. Ralph's been walking in his sleep ever since he was a child. You put him to sleep is what it is. So good stuff.
That's
all right.
awesome.
Pardon?
That's awesome.
Yeah. What we're going to do tonight is talk about your outlines. Now, that's one thing I didn't get into Canvas. I started getting Canvas. Let me check my window here. I've got that window. Well, we'll come back here in a second and see. I see your exegetical outlines. Ben, were you with your last email saying that you were uploading your sermon outline? Did you upload it? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Ethan, did you happen to, you definitely had a sermon outline because you were ready to preach tonight. So did you happen to upload your sermon outline too? You're muted there, Ethan. Sorry.
Sorry about that. I forgot about
That's
it.
okay.
Yeah, I uploaded about an hour and a half ago.
Okay, good. It'll be there. We'll look at it. And if Eli has his as well, we'll look at the exegetical outline, then we'll look at the sermon outline. That was the main focus for tonight. And as I have it by the schedule, tonight's just a draft. We're going to look it through, and I'm going to, just see what I see. And then if you need to make changes, as you want to make changes, redo it. And hopefully you can upload it again. Now, I've had some questions with other classes about uploading a second time. And if for some reason you can't, send it to me in email. Well, I mean, by next Tuesday. Now, Ethan, sorry about tonight. You were ready to, you're on at work. Hopefully you can maybe get off next week. So when you see in the schedule where it says preach sermon 1, preach sermon 2.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that a little late. I was.
That's all right.
I called my wife because I was like telling her last night about how I was stressed out about it. I was like, I gotta get it all together, and I'm like, I'm so not ready for it, but I'll get it all together. And so she knew today I wasn't gonna go to work today, and I called her and I was like, hey babe, guess what I just found out?
Oh, cool. But anyway, if you can make it, we'll all meet together in the classroom on just those nights where it says preach sermon and then the number. So that'll be next week. And then we take a week off. Basically, it's a week off, a week off, except for fall break. Then we're not meeting. So there's a week of 2 weeks. But then we're a week off. Oh, and we got Thanksgiving break in there too. And then we've got no, it technically Thanksgiving break doesn't affect us, but I've planned it where we just have off that week.
Yeah,
people maybe take off on a Tuesday night and if they're going somewhere. Go ahead, Ethan.
Yeah, I most likely won't be here that week because my hope is to go home for Thanksgiving, that week of Thanksgiving.
Yeah, and that's what I'm thinking. People want to take off Tuesday night because we have off Wednesday. So not Thanksgiving week. We won't meet that. Definitely fall break week, the week of the 17th. But then the other weeks, it's week on, week off, week on, week off, till we get to the end. Then we'll meet in the classroom and do everything that you talk about. So what we do in the off week, so we're going to preach next week, and then evaluation 3 is due, which is your favorite preacher. Then evaluation 4 is your first sermon. Evaluate yourself after preaching number 1, and that's October 3rd. That's 2 weeks away. Then we come back the week after. Well, what we'll do that week of the evaluation sermon 1, and then we have such a small class. Usually it would be if we had any extra sermons that were needed to be preached, we'll do that. But we'll just talk a little about the sermon, introduce narratives. So it'll be a real short night on that extra night. And then the nights we meet together, and then it's just the three of you. It'll probably only be a couple hours at the most that we're there to there at school. In 105, 106. Okay. I'm back, but I'm still a little jet lagged here. Let me lead us in a word of prayer here, and then we'll thank the Lord for the evening. Father, thank you for just the guys here and just our desire to honor you through communicating well. Thank you, Father, for just this privilege that we have, and pray for the guys as they continue to develop skill, that they'd feel the affirmation of your calling to proclaim the word, as well as then just the joy to do that, even though there's a lot of struggle with it at times. So bless us tonight as we communicate together. It'll be a good time of communication for Christ's sake. Amen. Amen. The class I was teaching, I think I told you it's basically a preaching class there. Were national pastors from 3 different countries: Uganda, Kenya, and Rwanda. And English is it's probably trade language, primary language that you use in Uganda, but there are so many native languages there that some people use Swahili more over in Kenya. Definitely not in Rwanda because of the genocide stuff and Uganda stuff that went on. But the 3 students that came from Rwanda, English was like their 4th language. So it's interesting. The Word of Life, we met on a Word of Life compound there in Kampala, and the gentleman who's the contact point for us. In fact, I had him as a student in this same class 4 or 5 years ago, and so he oversaw all our details for housing and everything. He's going to be a missionary down in Rwanda. He's going down there to work with Word of Life here in a couple of weeks. Finally going to get there. He'd been hoping to do that for a long time. But he and his wife come from 2 different tribes, is what I'm trying to get to. And she and he both speak languages they don't know. So, but they all can speak, 3 or 4 languages. So it was a little different context, to speak. I had to speak slower, and then realizing some of the English words I used were too big for some of them. They struggled. So I've never spoken or taught in with a translator. I can't imagine what that would be like. So I'm glad it was all in English. We had a good time. Good time. All right, let's look at the outlines that y'all had. I'm going to call up.
Dr. Doug.
Go ahead. Yes, sir.
I just want to say I actually have someone that works with me that's from Rwanda.
Oh, really?
And when she just started, she barely spoke English, and when she talked in Rwandan, it's like, is that a language? Like, it was so different. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And I use Google Translate and stuff, and it just doesn't. I can't believe, how different
It didn't
is.
do it. Yeah.
So,
In Uganda, they have a language of Uganda, which is Luganda. And then there's all those other dialects, depending on the tribe and the background that they come from. At our last meeting, it was sort of a testimony time, for the students, how'd you like the time, and for the professors, just to love on everybody there. And the academic dean had been a missionary with BMW. He's an American stateside. He was in Japan for 20 years. So we sang God is so good in English, Japanese, Lugandan, and what was the last one we spoke? We did 4 languages. Whatever the 4th one would be, I don't remember. But so it was interesting. I learned to sing a little bit. But yeah, it's different. All right, let me get Canvas up and we'll look at the outlines. First thing, Ben, let me come back and ask. You had asked about item C, and let me just clarify. Ethan, you had asked some questions too about speaking, what we're doing. All right, I'm going to go to Canvas here, but I need to make it a lot bigger. Oh, well, that doesn't make the window bigger, does it? Help. Maybe if I download it, I could make the file a little easier to see. Of course, now we got to back out and show it another window. What did I do? Stop sharing. That's what I'm going to do. You had asked about the instructions there, Ben, is what I was thinking of. Oh, that's the wrong file. Sorry. I downloaded the template and that doesn't help. All right, that's it. Let me share this one then. All right, you all can see that, I hope. And Ben, you were asking about in C about the manuscripts. Is that what it was? Taking the results of your exegetical study, prepare a sermon main idea. Not for tonight. But what I'm asking you to do with each sermon outline. So we're going to do exegetical study, talk about the outline. If you want to have a draft, this is the only time I'm having you to do an outline draft. Each of those middle weeks, we're going to talk through your exegetical outlines and then start working on, so what do you think the main idea should be? But tonight you've submitted an outline. So it would be just like the template has a MI statement or an SI is what I've done at a purpose statement, SP, an SQ, what's your question that you're going to use in the introduction, most likely, and then your outline. E, the manuscripts, like I said in one of the presentations, I have found over the years, I don't have to manuscript everything, but the times I want to have my eyes up and have thought through so I could talk it through quickly, and I'm not talking speed, I mean with ease, would be the introduction and conclusion, and then do with at least 2 illustrations. They could be real short, they could be a little longer. And I'm thinking of those in the body. You're going to be writing out any illustration you might have in the introduction, and then maybe a sandwich, rest of the story there in the conclusion. We sometimes do that. But then identify 2 of them in the body. You want to write out either a statistic or a quote or a story, personal illustration, and then either submit those manuscripts in a separate document or have them part as your outline. It doesn't matter to me. If you want to do it in outline, have your outline on 1 page, small piece of paper or half sheet or a full sheet even, and then have those manuscripts off to the side. Perhaps at least, and like I have in the template, have a rough outline of your comments in the introduction and conclusion, and then the rest of it written out on another piece of paper. All right, I showed you mine, and I have almost a full manuscript of everything. There's some things I don't say, but definitely your outline main points, and I want you to go with 2 levels. So you have a main point written out as full sentences. Now I'm coming back up to your outline itself. Full sentences for your outline main points, and then the subpoints, I encourage you to write those out, but you don't have to. Question? Does that answer whatever the question was?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, thanks.
Then the rest of the information there, there I left the outline. I put a couple more levels there, just distinguish the differences if you go down that far. But I'm only asking for the introduction, just the main points. For your outline, just these 2 points. If you want to write a fuller outline, subpoint 3rd level, 4th level, 5th, that's up to you. All right, let's get out of that one and go back to stop sharing. Now my computer's doing something interesting. Instead of when I share, it puts me down in the corner. Ben, it put you in the corner, and it did that in a class the other day. One of the students, he was the main thing. So shoot, I don't know whether my computer is now all of a sudden doing something different, or I hit a different button. All right, let's go back to Canvas and look at your exegetical outlines is what I want to. Come on, where's it at? Start with those first, exegetical outlines, an idea. All right, so Eli, you're not on, you're having to listen to this evidently, so we'll include your comments too, your outline. And I'm gonna try to go, all right, Ben, you're chapter 4. Let's go work our way through the book. So to be Ethan, you're first. Back up. Get this out of the way, make it bigger. And share the screen so you can see what I'm doing. Can you guys see Ethan's outline there?
Yep.
Yep, good. All right, those who follow Christ must actively, and I always start with just your information at the top because that's the center of the funnel. That's what you want to communicate. That's what you want to accomplish when you communicate in the sermon. And the question, that sets up your main idea. In fact, the answer to the question should be your main idea. So those who follow Christ must act, and you're just dealing with the text here, James 1:22-25. And Ethan, neither of us have studied it, so you're the one that knows it, but I'm just looking for form for doing your exegesis, and it looks real good. Those who follow Christ must actively apply and do what the Bible teaches, not simply learn its teachings. And James is just being very teachy here. You're not oriented to an audience. Your audience is just observing what's in the text. All right, James wanted to help his audience to understand using the words that I'm thinking of, and I think of the three primary purposes. That we started with understanding because we're intellectual beings. We then either move to application and then convincing them, or we move to convincing them and now what do I do about it? Apply. So those second two could come in any different order. And in most sermons, I'm going to accomplish two of them, one of them at least, but maybe two, maybe three, depending on my audience. But I'm looking at exegesis to help his audience, James, understand the importance of living out what the Bible says, what the Bible teaches. And then the thing, the thing. Ethan, at this point, I still stay with the text. You said we, studying a passage. What should, and I'm going to ask, does he use the word Christians? Stay with the wording in the text. One of you, and I forget who it was, had people that were traveling. What am I thinking of? Or maybe I saw it in the outline or thought of it.
Diaspora or Jewish diaspora?
Yeah, diaspora. That's right. That's the word that I saw. So did you use that, Ben? Is that what? Yeah, in your purpose statement. Okay. Whether it's that, because you want to keep in mind, and what that does, that reminds you as you're doing your exegesis of the context that they're in, they're experiencing, that they need to hear this truth in. They're scattered for their faith. They're suffering persecution probably for their faith. Maybe they're in that initial flush of Christians that were sent out of Jerusalem because of Jewish persecution after the death and resurrection of Christ. Probably a bit before Paul, but getting real close to when Paul came on the scene. All right, Ethan, as you're doing your exegesis, again, you're using we. So step back and don't use your audience today, we. James might say this imperative, do not just listen to the word, but act on it. I'd want to look at the verse and see what 22 says. James challenges his readers to not just listen to the word. Again, it's a minor thing, but it keeps you from jumping too soon to your sermon idea so you don't miss something in the context. All right, the main points, you have two. You think there's two, verse 22. All right, so the readers needed to apply and act out. So James, you think, is giving a exhortation here. And then comparing Christians who hear and then forget, and Christians, and again, use wording that comes from the text there. What do I see? Go ahead, Ethan.
Others.
I'm sorry, I stepped on you a couple times there. Ethan, go ahead.
It's okay. So at the beginning of the passage, he says, actually, let me pull it up. He says, "My beloved brothers," and so he's talking to his siblings in Christ, basically.
Yeah.
And so I should have used more of that word than Christians.
Yeah, because what it might say to you is you look at what the passage came before, what comes after, and the rest of the book, you're going, why does he use that word? Is there a relational context? Yeah. So what are we seeing there now as we're stepping back? I find for myself that I see the point once I get the outline. Now, some people get a point statement and then they work through the outline, but here we're exegesis, and so the outline almost has to be before, in a sense. Apply and act out biblical principles. Those who forget, those who act. So you're looking through your outline, trying to look for wording, and this is what you selected. Those who follow Christ, followers, you have followers, don't forget. Those who followers must actively apply and do. Yeah, that's what you're seeing. So I affirm what you've said is the truth. You've got it. And now and I'm just over talking. I realize, guys, here, but I'm just trying to remind what I've been trying to say, that you're at the center of the funnel, and with some exegetical ideas, as you're going to make the change, how should I say this truth to my audience? You're bombarded with those 3 questions and comparing to what the original audience understood. Did the author need to convince them? It sounds like the author was trying to convince them to do something at the least. Definitely in the book, he shows how to apply it. You said help them to understand the importance. I'm almost wondering if he's saying it a little stronger, the wording you had down there, Ethan. Don't just listen, do it. So he sounds like he's trying to convince them of the importance of living out. Now, again, I'm trying to sense a tone to the author's writing. So what should we do after studying? We should do, definitely we need to understand that, always build off the purpose of understanding, but now he's adding that extra element of, I think, of convincing them. So this statement that you have, what I was thinking, Ethan, those who follow Christ must actively, that'd be a statement that'd be easy to turn into a main idea statement. I haven't seen your outline. We should actively, you put us into it. We must actively apply and do what the Bible teaches. Or you could keep it at Christ followers need to, or again, like you had down below, terminology that you think your audience would relate to.
Yeah, I think I changed the wording just a little bit on my the sermon idea because I was trying to go with the subject and the compliment. Like I was trying to do better at wording that right and getting it. I think I spent like a good half an hour just trying to find trying to do the right wording for the sermon idea. But yeah, it's because again, it's pretty cut and dry. It's like he's talking to his brothers who are following Christ, and I'm talking to my brothers and sisters who are following Christ, and so it's not a huge cult. It's the cultural difference, but it's not a audience difference so much.
No, I understand that. In fact, when you think of how this statement's made right here, the exegetical idea, I had that arch. There's a statement by the original author to the original audience. We step back and we could just make it a supracultural, meaning it's a statement that applies to everybody. Those who follow Christ. Well, it's any Christian in any age. But then sometimes we state it for our audience, and that's where you're thinking of, you're saying, the wording. What would my audience relate to? I think there's a word that would be better for them. Same thing with your purpose. You're thinking of your purpose. This is what the author wanted to do. I probably will stay with what the purpose of the original author, but I'm going to think of the passage. I'm going to do what the passage does. which is, I think, convincing. Yeah, you're definitely explaining something, but you're taking the text is taken a little further to convince them to do it. So I'd probably be staying. I'm just talking out loud as I look at the passage with you or what you've written, and I'd be staying along his understanding, convincing level. And your question sounded like a good one as you phrased it. Now, this is a process. And so as we get in writing our sermon outline and fleshing it out and changing the wording and crafting the wording, maybe because it always forces me back up to these basic elements. I'm wanting to answer a question for the audience more than preaching an outline. I'm wanting to answer the question with a solid statement of truth or imperative that encapsulates the truth. Ethan, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was with the purpose. I was because I think I've kind of had the same thought process of like, yeah, like is it like this whole passage is about application, and so like the to apply was like I felt like that's what it should have been, but I was just like, but it wasn't so much like specifics of how to apply. It just was like I felt like he was trying to get them to understand the importance of applying. But convincing is probably a better word than understand. But like just kind of I had that same thought of like because like this passage is about application, but I don't know if it's like an application text, because it's not any specifics like of what you should do. It's just, hey, when you hear something from when you learn a biblical teaching, don't just listen to it. Don't just keep it in your head. Do it actively. Do it.
Yep. So the exhortation to act.
Yeah.
And usually there's an implied things to do. Let me just state a difference without looking at what you've done with your sermon outline yet. Remember that stage 7, I think, is 6 for purpose. Stage 7. Think of how you want to approach this. And I found if I'm doing an application, meaning I want to move toward that purpose, is I want to show you how to study and listen to a passage of scripture. Then usually your outline points are imperatives. And the imperatives are seen in the text. First, you do this. Second, you do that. Third, you do that. All right, that's the structure of the outline. But that means I've got a deductive outline. I'm going to state the whole idea in my introduction. Remember that? Those who follow Christ must actively apply. And so the way that this is stated right here, not simply learn its teachings, it raises the question, well, why? Which means more, if I were just going to stay with the way that's stated there, it's going to be a convincing. I want to explain it, but I also want to convince them, okay, I got to do that. Then the next question is, so how do I do it? All right, so there is a question of where do I want to state my main idea? Do I want to unfold it in an inductive structure, or do I want to do it deductively, where I state the whole idea and then show them how? Usually, is it what comes? Let me go to your. I've got it back out of sharing. Let me go to your sermon outline now. Is it? Come on. All right, there's Ethan. And see what you did with it. Okay, let me share this screen here, guys. Which one is it? Download. All right, that's this one right here. This is your sermon outline. You guys can see that, I think, I hope. No.
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, I can see it.
Those who follow Christ must apply to be faithful, perseverant Christian followers. We are to be doers of the word. Yeah, you're capturing the words. That's good because it picks up the words. I mean, we hear we've used doers of the word. And I'm just my personal reaction. Now, I actually doing what the Bible teaches must be doers of the word, not hearers only. And the encouragement I have about the main idea, it should be shorter, which means our exegetical ideas, long, clunky. We want to include sort of everything that's in the passage, make sure it says the full truth. But here I want to focus on a specific statement, good size, good memorability, to be faithful, perseverant, Christ followers. You know, I'm struggling with the word perseverant. Ethan, maybe you don't. So that's where I'm looking at wording, you know, when I get down the road, but I'm not going to criticize that at all. That's something you've got to deal with. You must be doers of the word, not only hearers. All right, so to motivate my students, yeah, there's a convince type word, motivate. It's more than just instruct and explain, to take their next step in applying. So I want them to say, all right, Pastor Ethan, I want to do this. I'm going to commit to it too. Show me how. All right, that's the next step. Take my little outline or whatever you're going to have as the next step. All right, what is my next? And I saw the words next step, so that's what I'm using. What's my next step as a follower of Christ? It's to be faithful, perseverant.
Oh yeah, I guess
What?
it doesn't really work, does it?
What? Why does it not work? I'm just looking at it there. I'm wondering why I feel like I see, because I see Christ follower. What are you thinking, Ethan?
Well, I guess kind of what I'm thinking it's so like a lot of my sermon is like the three next the three next steps in my mind of being a doer of the word. Of there's this level, there's this level, and there's this level.
Mhm.
And so like as my audience can identify with one of those things, they can say, okay, so this is where I need to get to, or this is where I need to stay. And so that was kind of what I wanted my question to be focused on, but I don't feel like it goes super well with my idea. But
What do you think you need to add? If anything, if you just say, see, there's a context. If you use your sermon question in the introduction, there's a context you're going to set up. It's the topic. It's the, okay, I don't over talk. Looks like you're going to focus on being a Christ follower. What are you thinking? Anything, Ethan?
I think I need I think maybe next step needs to be in my sermon idea, and so maybe it's like the sermon idea the next the I guess I don't know how to word it right then, but
I'm wondering if my first thought as I look at it, what next step? You've emphasized something about the word here in it. As a Christ follower, what's my next step concerning God's word? Now, I haven't looked at your outline, but I'm just thinking of those, and I'd like to look at this because this is really this is really the sermon in a nutshell. All right, so I start with there. Then I go to the main points. To be a doer of the word. Oh, wow. So you are bringing in the word. Secondly, where's your second point? To be a doer of the word. Wow. And to be a doer of the word. So good. You must persevere, living out. You must. Wow. Good imperatives. It's not a 1, 2, 3. It's more convincing, but boy, it's a real close to a 1, 2, 3. Anyway. I think the missing element there in the question is being a doer of the word. You've got it there. You have it in your outline. You have it here in your main idea. You have it sermon idea. You have it in your outline. Somehow recrafting your question. So I'm looking at your introduction. Where would you use your question? Oh, here you go. Transition. So what's your next step in applying the word to your life? Now, depending on how you set up this word applying, is that meaning doer? Different wording. So we use synonyms sometimes. Good. Applying, if you've already talked about applying as being doing it, living it out, then the wording you have here for your transition statement, and here's your question here. Looks like. Is that true?
yeah.
I'm telling you what I see as the first time through that thing. Talk about how my passage seems applicable. Oh, here, so you are talking about applicability. It's easier said than done.
Ironically.
Go ahead. What?
I find it kind of ironic that the passage. So this passage is all about being doers of the word, not hearers of the word. And ironically, that's easier said than done. Like, it's easy to say that, it's easy to think that, it's easy to be like, oh yeah, I know that, but to actually put it into application is hard, is difficult. But that's what the passage is calling us to do. And so I just think it's kind of a fun, ironic like thing of. I even address it in my conclusion too. I like how I say that like there are gonna be people who sadly and ironically hear this message and say, that'd be cool to do, and do nothing about it. And so it's just I found that interesting. And so yeah, I had that in a couple places in my introduction and conclusion.
Yeah, I also hear at your point 3, how's this passage easily applicable? Like you're just talking here, and then sort of a sub sentence after your point 3. Now you hadn't expanded your introduction, so I'm just just looking at it and hearing what you're saying. Here's where you could flash your wording. It real quickly. It's easier to be whatever you just said. It's easier to say I'm a doer than to do it. You're wanting to shorten up and get your wording out that you're going to be using, doer of the word. Maybe even saying your sermon idea right there, because then you're going to say it in full. Because now I'm seeing it in full. Because then your question is, so how do I be a doer of the word? Well, first you got to do this, and second you got to do that. So you're really trying to tell us how. It's got a convincing tone to it, as well as a applicational. So it's a very practical, and that's what James is doing. Something very practical.
Yeah.
Here you've got some. Now I'm looking inside the points, because every point then now has a similar structure to what you're doing in a sermon. All your sub points here are for A, or for 1, your A, B, C are to explain this main point and relate it to life. Now you're using wording that keeps your audience close too. That's great. Yeah, you're almost clarifying here because good stuff. Non-believers are not children of God yet. And now you're going to give some very practical, the importance of being. So being a doer, you must be a hearer, and you can hear it in several ways by reading and listening. Is that what I'm seeing?
Yep.
I think. Yeah, and then keeping your audience close there. So here's what we're doing too, and I think it's a good technique. It isn't always what we do, but before I leave a point, I'm going to bring the audience in and say some very practical words. If you obey your parents, first hear what they say. Now that's a general illustration for all of us that you could quickly flash. Same thing with God, our Heavenly Father, and you're already positioned them, and they're thinking, okay, I could do that. I got to do that. So that then when you get to the conclusion, right, dangers. So what's your next step? And your number 2, you're going to remind them, do you need to be a hearer, or do you need to, and I'm thinking of your points there. You're going to remind them and then lead them in a prayer of action where they're going to make a commitment to do that. Good. I think it's a good solid structure. Go back and refine it as you think you need. Add your, expand your introduction and conclusion into what you're going to say. A manuscript, and it could be in an outline form if you want to keep it right in your outline, or you could just write it off to the side just because you're going to practice it. I want to say words where I get instant engagement. I mean, I'm not wandering around with my words. I'm clear to the point. You don't need to put all of your verses there. You're going to read. I don't mean that. Just tell yourself I'm going to read, and then you're going to have the text there to read. You don't need to put that in your notes. Some people do. Some people type in all their Bible passages they're going to read. The problem with that, there's a good thing about it because you got it. You aren't fumbling around your Bible. The problem is that for me, I tend to move too fast, and people are still turning in their Bibles. So they're either get be conditioned. Well, I can't get there anyway, so I'm not even going to look at my Bible. So I've got to ask, do I want people to really read along with me? Then I've got to take some time, listen as they're flipping. Of course, with our electronics, we don't hear that anymore. And they're, but we still have to give them a little time to find it there. But you have a good solid outline here, Ethan.
Thank you.
Question, comment you'd have?
Yeah, I think one thing I really like looking on it that I really liked that I was able to keep what was so like how uh, James says the word brother four times in the first chapter.
Mm-hmm.
And so that idea of family, I was like I thought about putting that into like the illustration for every step. There's that it goes along with that family illustration of so the first one, to be a doer of the word must be a follower of the word. And so you're not going to listen to other people's parents, you're going to listen to your own parents. And so the idea of non-believers aren't in the family of God, and so they're not going to, I mean, you can't be a doer of the word if you're not in that family.
Good.
But then next step is, once you're in that family, you got to listen to the parent. You got to listen to God. What is He saying before you can? Because if you just do stuff without even consulting Him, you're going to get in trouble because you're not going to know what to do or how to do it. And then finally, the last one is like good parents. My last one, the illustration was, the good parents do not expect perfection, but expect your best effort to listen and obey. Like, because I loved the word, the perseverance word that he used in I used the ESV was the version I used, and perseverance was the was very cool because it's a very like similar word to perfection, but it's not perfection. Perfection, it's clean, spotless, pure, but perseverance is, no, even when you make mistakes, you still continue to work at it, still continue to try, still continue to get back up again, kind of thing. And so that was kind of my third step, is persevere in living out the word, persevere in yeah.
So that word is in verse 25 here in your outline.
Yep.
Yeah, good. So you show us in the text, you clarify what that means, persevering under trials, things that James has already said, going back to Galatians as another illustration. Don't grow weary. Good. And then in Hebrews for sure, because he exhorts us. Good stuff. All right, let's go to Eli and call up his, look it around. Eli, okay, Eli didn't, this is the, let's go to his exegetical outline because he submitted that, but not the sermon yet. And so we can walk through the book here. Eli's in chapter 3 about the tongue.
I'm glad I didn't do that one, because that was one of the other ones I thought about. It was
why didn't you want to do it?
Oh, so I like it because I love like music, and so I was thinking about like because my sermon starts with me being an idea person. So like when you said, okay, we're gonna do a sermon in James, I was like, ooh, I could do this or this or this or this or this, and so I brought it down to 3. I was either gonna do I forget where, I think it's James 4, I think, is where he talks about pride. I was thinking about that one, and I was thinking about the tongue, and I was like, ooh, I could do like a music illustration, or like being like a good at like singing and like taming your tongue in that way. But I ultimately was like, I had just done in my discipleship with my youth pastor, with the youth pastor I'm working with, we had talked about James 1 and being doers of the word and not just hearers. And so I was like, okay, I think that's God telling me I got to do this one. So I'm glad I didn't do taming the tongue then.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, Eli did. So let's see what he said here. James. exegetical. All right, so I got the right window here. All right, if you guys see that with me, James 3 verses 1 to 12. And James is so practical. His statement here, the exegetical idea, the tongue should be controlled for good. The only other thing we could do exegetically is say something like, and James exhorts the people to, all right, you don't have to, but it's obvious what's going on. James wants his readers, so he's definitely staying with the readers. Good, Eli. He wants his readers to understand that the tongue should be controlled. All right, question I always ask, does the author move beyond just understanding to trying to convince them to do something about it? You know, I've not looked at this passage in a while, so I almost think he's giving understanding as the dominant thing. How should the tongue be used? It should be used for control for good. All right, good. That's what he's thinking, the question that James is answering. What I'm thinking of is, as I'm doing exegesis, is why would he be saying this? And we aren't taking the time, we aren't looking at the whole book, and if we had a bunch of us in the room or we had different passages, maybe we could see a progression of the message of James. I mean, James obviously is writing to people that are in some tough times. There are some that have money or have possessions and some don't. And if you get the picture of people that are fleeing for their life, in the Jewish culture, you take in people. Hospitality is a big part of the Middle Eastern culture, not just Jewish, also in the Islamic culture, very much a Middle Eastern thing. You take people in and give of your resources to provide for their needs. So they've been there. How long have they been there? And you get a feeling of the tensions are the rich are now trying to feel a little jealous of the resources they're using, and the poor, wow, they're just, I don't know what they're feeling, but there seems to be a focus more on those that are having a tough time with that. So where is the tongue being used? Is it being used behind the scenes as we gossip about one another? Is it big? All right, that's a contextual question. The outline, men struggle in many ways. Eli, I'd wonder, is there wording that he uses? Men, does he talk differently? Stumble, is that the word James is using there? Teacher, and I don't fully understand a teaching position, a teaching talk is undesirable. The tongue is a little rough wording here, is tough to control. Probably take the out. Man of control is the strongest, great control is a sub. Second point, the tongue exerts great control. It's obvious he's just teaching here, illustrating James. So he said, we stumble with our tongue. It's a small thing, but it controls. I think that's the point. Small. I don't see the word small, but I think back in the text, Eli, you go back and look for those words because it's trying to paint a word picture. It's a rudder, controls a big ship. Bit controls a big horse. Spark sets a whole forest on fire from that little ember. Again, what's the flow of thought? We stumble with our tongue. The tongue is capable of great evil. Wow. Now he's getting to the nub of it, but it still sounds like, Eli, how you've written this, James is just explaining this. I haven't heard any wording that says he's trying to convince them to do anything, believe anything yet, except to believe that the tongue's a problem. The tongue should not be used for good or evil. Wow. So it probably is like you identified. This is an understanding one. Why? Maybe it was a tough thing. They didn't really understand how they were taught. And again, I'm going beyond, and this compels me to do some background study, some further study in the text broader, how they might be relating to one another. Why is he just staying at a understanding level? Because they didn't understand it. Tongue should not be used for good or evil because we can do that. All right, so a good breakdown of the exegetical, good points. if we had the sermon, then we could see how you take that. I'm assuming at this point, that's a good statement. You could probably just stay with your exegetical idea. That's a supracultural statement. Now, you could flesh it out a little differently for your audience, adding some wording. Our tongue, the tongue of believers should be controlled for good, what kind of wording? And then get James, do I want them to understand? I want my audience to understand that the tongue, and now I've got tongue, but should I start inserting wording? It's not just the tongue I lick things. It's we're talking about talk. I mean, it's a figure of speech. It's a metaphor for our talk. So when should I help people to see that? The fact that I've written in tongue here takes me back up. Maybe tongue is okay because in a church context, I think we'd understand what we're using a metaphor. But maybe in another context, I want to make it very specific. So I might use a different word. And then as I'm introducing it, as I'm working through the text, I want to show them that the connection with the word that I've chosen as opposed to tongue. We stumble in many ways. The same points that he's making here, Eli, I'm assuming you could just stay with the same structure because these are the points he's trying to make about the tongue. Understanding the tongue should be, all right, so there's a bite to this statement. It needs to be controlled. What else do I want to observe here? How should we use our tongue? Because then it's you're asking, almost saying it should be used for good or evil because there's the answer to it. It's building up to it. All right. Well, I'm observing, Eli, you have a good structure that's moving toward this final point. That's really what James is doing, and I just follow the structure here. More than likely, but I'm looking forward to seeing how you've done it. How does this fit into the book? Is a question I wrote down on Eli's thing at the bottom. I printed them out. And how does it fit in the flow? What comes before in 2, and now what comes after in 3? And maybe I could discern something from the flow of the text that'll help me to see why the tongue was such an issue. And then that overall message, how does that fit into living in tough times? And I'm using that just as a general statement. Anybody else have a question, observation that Eli could hear us making as we're looking at his outline here, or a suggestion or a question more?
I feel like a good, so you were talking about how, like, what's another way you say tongue?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I feel like a good modern view of that is voice, of like your voice, of like not only like your physical voice, but also like your like what you're putting out in the world. Your social media would be a huge thing to hit.
Oh, wow.
Because like, I mean, that's your voice. That's what people are seeing. And so like control your voice, control what is being heard and seen by other people. But anyway, that was just kind of what I thought about as far as like a modern way of saying tongue.
Do you think it'd be too far a stretch, Ethan and Ben, if we also mention somewhere, it's communication is what you're talking about, and what medium do I use to communicate? Our presence should be controlled for good. You know how we roll our eyes, or we sort of, we're indicating good or bad. Yes, it's speech that's implied, but you're going beyond that, Ethan. So that's a good suggestion. Again, your audience, and then what's your purpose with them? Who's my audience? If it's a youth group, wow, then I definitely want to touch on things like that. If it's the whole congregation, well, then I'd have a number of layers of communication and how we talk. Good. Ben, any thoughts?
Not really, just tongue. Could say different things like speech or communication. it's more Old English used it as in that way.
Yeah.
And other Latin
Common
languages
name.
use it still that way, but yeah, another. And I agree with you, like in the Christian context, I guess you'd say, like a lot of Christians are familiar with that type of language, the tongue, you're talking about speech, but could be more specific.
Mhm. Good. Well, let's go to Ben. Let's go to your exegetical idea. Or exegetical outline. I'm trying to do two things at once here. Oh, that's it. That's the wrong one.
I think we looked at mine a couple weeks ago.
Did we?
In
Okay.
class, yeah.
All right, then let's just go to your. I don't remember what we've done. Sorry.
It's been a while.
I've not looked at it yet, so let's see what we got here. Which is good. Oh, come on. I gotta go back and share. All right, so now we got your outline here. And your sermon idea, submitting to the will of God unites us with him in the church. Good, solid statement of truth. Your purpose for the sermon is to explain that submitting to the will of God unites the listener with God in the church. Now, I've not looked at your outline here. Just a quick question. Could you take one more step to convince them that submitting? Now that's always my thought. I don't want to just stay at explaining. That's ahead. I want to move it. Yes, and I've not looked at your outline yet, so I'm going to assume you're definitely explaining what this means in a very personal, important way. But then that last point is, will you submit to the will of God? That in my mind, that's the difference. So it's what I do at the conclusion. My purpose is seen most obviously in my conclusion. Yes, an explanation one would still be, boy, I hope you understand that submitting to God is important. What can you do about it now? Yes, you can tie that into a conclusion, but if you know you're moving there. All right. You had a second one here. I want my audience to understand that submitting to the will of God unites them. Okay, go ahead, Ben. I'm talking over you.
Sorry.
No, you're right.
So for this outline, it's not exactly how I want it yet, but I just did it because I didn't decide yet.
Right.
So I was thinking about I was looking at the book and the different outlines that they suggest. The principle to be applied, I was thinking of that one. But
yeah,
I didn't really settle with that. I'm more leaning towards the inductive deductive development, because I feel like that's how James writes it in 4:1-10, because he gives the problem and then he gets to the solution without really hinting toward it until the middle.
So what you're saying is inductively is, let's observe what's going on here. They've got some problems. They're seeking their own pleasures, and I'm looking at your exegetical outline. That's causing disunity in there. So what do you do about it? James tells us, and that's what you're doing in the middle of the sermon. Is that what you're?
Yeah. So I'd like to. I say explain sermon purpose in the first part. I'd like to explain, but in the second part, I would use like to exhort.
Yep. I get you. Aim toward your furthest one is what I always encourage everybody and think about myself. Meaning, write my purpose, because that's ultimately what I know to accomplish. But to get there, I know I have to really nail it down. In fact, I hear you the way you were just talking, Ben, that you're going to talk about what's going on there, in James, meaning in that situation culturally and contextually. But then I'm going to step back as a pastor before I leave that point, because I've just placed it's a problem. What do we do about it? What did they do about it? But then I want to step back and think just open-ended without revealing any confidences, because every church has struggles with people, and you don't want to imply someone that you know about and others know about, because then they're all looking at, oh, they're looking at Joe. He's talking about Joe. Well, no, I don't want to talk about Joe frontally, so I want to be careful with how I say it. But yet, I want to step back and say, we run into these things in life too. As James talks to them, God's talking to us. That type of talk, which moves you right into what you're saying there. We need to hear it. So now you're wanting to exhort them. All right, now I look at the main points. Our submission to the will of the flesh causes disunity. Wow. So you are bringing just a truth in. You don't have to list any specific examples in a sense. We all can say, yeah, and there's where the head should be going down. You'll give real life examples to make a parallel from them that come right out of the text. And your second point, our God desires us to submit to his will, to have unity with him. Disunity with God and others, or God and the church, or, I'm just looking at words. We have unity with him. Is it possible does James also imply the church there? It just struck me as I was looking at you mentioned God in the church, and then but only mentioned God here.
Yeah, I really don't think he is. He's just focusing on God, and I really wanted to just make that 1 through 6 one main point, because 4 through 6 is exegetically a subpoint of, like, it's a further explanation of what he's doing. But I don't know what you would suggest there. What's worth sacrificing?
Yeah, again, you're saying these verses here, 4 through 6, are a subpoint.
It's a continuation of the same thought.
Oh,
I mean, it's a new idea.
Go ahead.
I do understand that it is a new idea, and I could make it a separate point because of that. But I don't know.
It is, and I'm looking back at your exegetical outline here, Ben, and that's what I want to do. You're saying it's a subpoint, but is it more a specific point that again, I have not studied the passage as much as you have lately, so it's been a long time. It causes disunity in us, but yet, there's that ultimate. Is that what he's describing? I mean, he desires something that we live out practically with others, but ultimately it's an issue with him. Is that what he's saying? Again, I'm asking a question more than I'm giving an answer for you. Here he seems to be giving a practical, we're looking at your sermon outline, but I might also know that's what the text is saying because of all the tensions there. But then he shifts. What you're saying, Ben, is he shifts in his thinking to talk about our relationship with God. Calls them adulterers there, doesn't he? He does somewhere, and I don't remember where it was, whether it's in
verse 4, I think.
Yeah. So it's jealousy desires us. Maybe that's in that context. That strong wording is using there, but it's lived out in our fleshly human longings that get distorted. And now coming back to your third one, let me just jump on down. Submitting to God is the solution for the disunity that manifests from our submission to the flesh. Does he jump back to God and the church in this final third point, 7 to 10? You wrote it in an exegetical idea you included with God and the church, but you don't have it in your statement here. Oh, and I see God. You have God there. Yeah,
it's more about living purely and your relationship with God. He doesn't mention much about others.
I don't know. It all of a sudden struck me. James is a very Jewish book, there's a sense of chiastic thinking. You know, he's starting with them and their issues there. He ends with them and their issues amongst themselves. Is that true? In verses 7 to 10? The devil wants to flee to resist him. No, I see. I'd have to look back. Draw near to him. Is he talking about their cultural situation, like in verses 9 and 10? You remember that? Well, you remember.
Well, in 9 and 10,
Or go ahead.
He's talking about what they should do instead.
Mhm.
So like 9, it's change their attitude, be sad about their sin,
Mhm.
and then 10, humbling themselves before God.
Okay, just something I would want to check out there myself. I don't know, chiastic thinking. If you're familiar with a chiasm, there's a point, and then a subpoint, and then you come back to the first point. Now it gets bigger than that. That's just a thought. I wonder if, you know, so he's talking about them, and in a chiasm, the center point is the focus. And so if that's true, then the focus is here on verse 4 to 6. You know, it's ultimately a problem we have with God that we live out. Here's the problem. Now, what you would look for in the text, Ben, would be wording, attitudes. You know, you had the word attitude. Definitely, I see in your outline disunity, unity, and then unity with God in the center. All right, so I'm needing to do a little bit more study with you. Let's look at your outline though. Submitting the will of God unites us with him in the church. And you're beginning with, as you're describing, an inductive. What was going on there? So what would you be starting with here? Something about problems in churches is what I'm imagining. Where do they come from? Why are they an issue? And why are they a problem? Yeah, again, I'm talking out loud. You know, you're not giving the main idea, is what I'm thinking in inductive, deductive, but you're showing there's a problem here, disunity. Let's see, the same thing went on there in James' time. And the submission of their will of the flesh, in this case, caused the disunity. And you're going to relate it. Our desire is to submit to his will, to have unity with him. God desires, to submit to his will, to have unity with him. Reflecting on disunity, unity. But here's a core thing that he hadn't talked about. It was with them, disunity, well, with God and them.
I was thinking, in the first section, he really focuses on the disunity with the church.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I could state it in a way of saying like the outward problem, which is disunity in the church, is due to an inward problem, disunity with God.
Yeah, you know, stay true to the text. If that's it, that would be a good focus. And now you're getting to a root problem that you work back out. Now, again, I need personally to, if I were to really want to react to, yeah, I'd want to study the passage as well. But it sounds like you're thinking about it a little bit more. If that is really what he's doing in those closing verses, he's bringing it back and applying to them. Because then you're going to get, here's your is this your, in a deductive inductive, you're really wanting to say your deductive, which is your statement at the end. Third point, which is submitting to the will of God unites us with him in the church. Submitting to God is solution for disunity. You're saying it a little differently, but you got to capture the passage. Keep working, for sure.
All right, thanks.
Ethan, question, comment, as we look at Ben's.
I think it looks really good, and I'm excited to hear it. Like,
Yeah,
I love, like, it's a very like applicable text to today. Of like, I found it weird that like the other day I was like looking on Google Maps and there's like 30 churches in my area, but I go to one, and those churches have nothing to do with each other.
Mm.
and it's such an interesting like concept because of I think it's a lot of just because of Western civilization, the uh, a lot of the like commercialization of church, where it's almost like churches are more like grocery stores where they're kind of their
Mm.
own little thing, and they have their own have like have they all have the same thing. A lot of them have the same thing, but they're saying, hey, come here, not here, come here, not here, go there, not there, and it's just I feel like it's actually a big huge problem in America of like the more churches need to be working together with other churches.
Mm.
And yeah, so I think this is a perfect text for today, and so I'm excited to hear it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So what Ethan's saying, I'm resonating with you for saying the same thing. We all, this is just so practical. It definitely is what you're saying. So whatever level you could deal with it, there's a lot of layers. So James is very practical for us today. We got to contextualize, show them what's going on in the text, but then show the parallel. People are people. We still have struggles. Same kinds of struggles. Um, what else do we want to do? All right, we've looked through the outlines. Next week with your outline, go back, review, change as you need. If you can, I don't know what Canvas does. I've not used it as a student. So in the past, students used to be able to replace a file, but the way we're setting it up now, we're using turnitin.com a little bit more is what we've been asked to do. And so I think turnitin.com messes things up for a resubmission for some reason. Now, try to resubmit it, your outlines. And if you change anything, if you don't change anything, you're going to keep what's there. But I'm assuming you're going to make some revisions. I heard both of you talking, and Ben, you're going to add some more into there. If not, then send me an email there. Eli,
I think
ask me any
last
questions
time
there. Pardon?
when I had the exegetical outline,
Oh,
I just
yeah.
submitted it once so that you could see it.
Mhm.
And I think there was a setting you changed so that then I could submit it again.
Oh, I
I think by
did.
default, the default way to do it, it doesn't let
Mhm.
us submit it again, but then you have to go in and manually change it
Okay, well,
somehow. I don't know.
if anybody runs into a problem, I'll definitely go back and look into Canvas and see if there's something I could set. I remember with one class, see, because it's been not just this class, Ben, that somebody else had a problem submitting something in last cycle. I've got another class going on right now, but it was in cycle 1, and they had the same thing. They had a problem with it. And I remember, and maybe it was what you're talking about, I had to change one switch in Canvas. And so you were able to resubmit it, you're saying.
I was after that, yeah.
Good, good. I'll go back and thank you for reminding me. I'll go back and look for that if that's an issue.
Problems.
But let me know. Send me a note through Canvas or email or whatever. Let's take a break and then I'll come back and the rest of the information I need to introduce from the textbook are introductions and conclusions, and then the visual, verbal, nonverbal aspects of preaching. Robinson has a chapter on that, and we'll talk that through from the notes if you had your notes. But let's take a 5-10 minute break here right now. Okay. I'm going to stretch and go get something to drink. See you guys in a minute. All right, guide. We are back. I get my notes out here and I have it on the screen as well. Let me just put the notes on the screen and talk through them a little bit. Just to finish up going through Robinson. Where are they? It's not inbox downloads. I think that's, nope, it's not it. That's my downloads. I know I opened it up. There it is right there. So let me go back to. Oh, there it is right there. All right, so that's what you see in your notes. Maybe a little bit bigger. Walking back through what Robinson says, at the number stage 1, we select a thought unit to study, and with the intention we're going to preach that thought unit. Stage 2, we do all our appropriate study and whatever we have as a practice for getting into the passage. In order to stage 3, you know, we narrow down in the fall to discern a exegetical idea. For me, I usually have to have an outline and word studies done, so I'm seeing the words and the meanings, and I'm almost paraphrasing the whole passage. They're laying it out grammatically is what I usually do, and see the outline, and then determine that exegetical idea. Bombard it with questions in order to determine the exegetical purpose, what I think the author was trying to accomplish, and I'm looking at the wording of the outline that I've written, using the wording of the text, and then adding in there, and this is what I'm adding in that Robinson didn't have, asking a question. What is that question that the exegetical idea is the answer to? And that gives me a sense of what the author's arguing as he's going through. Stage 4, now I'm trying to think of the audience with those questions. In order to stage 5, write a sermon idea. You know, I'm still at the center of the funnel. Sense of purpose, because I've thought through the audience that I'm speaking to, and a question that I would be answering. And in most textual studies, you know, we're answering the exegetical, or we're using the exegetical work, almost a 1-for-1 with different wording and following the flow of the argument. But there's a way of crafting it differently. 6, what's my purpose with this audience, and what do I hope to accomplish? 7, how do I think I want to approach it? Inductively, deductively, semi-inductively. And then 8, outline it. 9, flesh out the outline with illustrating material, and I call all those things illustrations, though Robinson only said there's one. He used the term illustration just for one thing, but I'm broadening it out. So I'm going to listen for more. If you quote, if you use a narration, if you use a personal illustration in your sermon, I'm encouraging you to use at least one level 3 illustration and maybe one level 1. So that's in my evaluation form at the bottom that I circle that, underline it. A level 3 illustration, remember the 5, level 5, I've not lived it, I had to learn it, but the audience didn't live it either. They had to learn it, but yet the connection between the two, meaning if I'm speaking to a bunch of 3-year-olds about flying a supersonic airplane, they just couldn't, it illustration that doesn't connect. There's a lot of those out there. I don't want to use them. Level 4, I've learned about it, you've learned about it, like the Titanic. We all can learn about that from history, but yet it's out there. And there's where all the statistics and the surveys are taken. We're learning it from someone else. It's a now personal testimony could touch you personally, so that's not a good one. but it's all those illustrations that are more just on the head level. Level 3 is I've lived it, you have not, but you can learn about it. So I can talk about flying a supersonic airplane, but I got to talk about it in a way that would communicate to you. So any level 3 illustrations I use, I got to make sure, and that's why I'm asking you to manuscript them, because you want to write out what is the point that my personal illustration is making. And I want to make sure I say that, because the tendency with a level 3 illustration is to over talk, meaning I give too many details that I'm aware of and the audience just doesn't get the point out of it. Or I under talk, meaning because I'm familiar with the story, I didn't write it out well, and I didn't say what I'm thinking. That happens sometimes. So manuscripting those to make sure you're saying the point helps you, so you get your eyes up, but also that you say exactly what you need to say to get the point through, and don't overtalk. Don't get too much information and lose the point. Level 2, the listener has experienced it, I've not. For example, I move into a farming community. I've never lived in a farming community. I've never been a farmer. But over the years, I can learn about farming. So I can use an illustration like, when it comes to harvest time, you all are out in the field and you've been there. You know what it's like to go through. I mean, I can't talk like I've done it, but I sure can talk like you've done it in a way that they're going, yep, you're right. I understand that illustration because you took it from my world. And it's spoken with credibility. A level 1 is an illustration where a good percentage of the people that you're talking to have experienced it. If I'm a dad changing diapers, I talk about changing diapers. I say, guys, you ever been there? Yeah, their heads are going up and down. So I'm using a real life example of the truth that we all have lived together. So if you're putting your sermon together, look at your kinds of illustrations. Yes, use level 4, but the more that you use every once in a while a level 3 or a level 1, then that brings the audience in a context where the truth is being lived out. Sometimes they're negative. Your illustrations are, here's where a person's living the opposite, and you're demonstrating why that's wrong. So it's not always just a positive thing. This is where we give personal examples. You never give an example of another person in a negative light. Boy, he sure blew it. If we do that, that we run into some problems. But we could talk personally. I blew it. I did this wrong, and speak with some credibility too. Is what we do. You flesh it out with illustrations, and then stage 10. That's just where we're at. We prepare the introduction, the conclusion. Why at the end? Well, Robinson recommends you save that to the end so it doesn't drive your crafting of the body of the sermon. You're writing something that helps you to get into the sermon, into the body, and then conclusion, you're writing that which brings an appropriate ending to the body of the sermon. One book that I use in the next class, the person recommends, you think through a structure of the whole sermon. I begin with me, talking about how I relate to the topic, and the less the audience knows you, the more you need to identify with the audience a little bit more. And so that's why he's saying, begin with me. Then he says, we. Said, I've got a question about this topic, but I'll bet you do too. And so you're bringing in them and engaging them in the introduction. You're saying, you need to hear this as much as I need to hear this, is really what you're implying there. Me, we, God. And there's the body of the sermon. Me, we, God. And then the conclusion. Now, sometimes we touch on it in the God part. You. All right, you've heard the truth. What are you going to do about it now? I've suggested a few things as we were talking through the sermon, the God part. So will you do it? And then he recommends sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes put a we at the end of it. If we made these changes, if we really believed it, this would be the difference that it would make in our lives, your life. So me, we, God, you, me. And so here's the conclusion and the beginning, the introduction, the first two, and the ending. All right, let's talk through what Robinson talks about: 5 basic purposes to create interest in the topic, in the whole sermon, in God's truth. We're wanting to present a main idea, a sermon idea. So that idea is what we want to orient people to create interest. Why do I need to be listening to that? To reveal the need and the purpose for the sermon. Why do we need to hear what God says about it? Why do we need an answer to the question that we're asking? To orient to the subject. Now here we're either doing a semi-inductive, at least, where we're introducing just part of the sermon idea. To orient to the biblical text. This is where you say, you already heard the passage read by Deacon Schmotzkoff before, or whatever his name was, and now open your Bibles again to this passage where we're going to see Israel, or we're going to hear James talking to, that's another part of it. Then finally, depending on your structure, that point E, state the main idea and provide a structural overview. Now, what that means is sometimes we state the whole idea in a deductive sermon outline, and then the points explain it, reveal what we're trying to say, give subpoints. If it's an inductive sermon, we're just raising a question that the outline unfolds. So that E is just depending on your structure. The structural overview, there are times in a sermon that you actually say, the points that you're going to cover. Because as you look at it, you're determining, I think the audience really needs to hear where we're going so they have a sense of the structure. Now, I put in your notes a box from a book by on preaching from Donald Sanukian, and he gives some suggestions as to when you would cover a preview, he calls it. And in fact, he uses the word hunks, sections of your outline, meaning your main points there. If it's deductive and a list, and deductive and a progression, so you can look through that and process that as you develop more skill. Don't worry too much about it, but it's there. It's good material. I'm not trying to diminish that, but don't get too lost in it for our sermons here. But come back to it and think, all right, what do I need to say in the introduction that creates interest, engages the audience, orients to the topic, question, or says the whole idea, raises that need for the audience, and those points can come in different order, and then orients to the text. And sometimes that orientation is setting the context and then reading the passage or asking to open back up their Bibles. Keep in mind, the objective is to get the attention, and that doesn't mean just stand up and jump up and down. That would get people's attention, or have a big video clip that has all the drama to it.
I'm gonna do jumping jacks now, just because you told me I can't. I'm gonna go up every
Cool.
sermon for the rest of my life. I'm gonna go up there and do a couple of jumping jacks just to get people's attention, and
Well,
I'm gonna say, Dr. Mike Dodds told me to do this.
Hey, don't you dare quote me. There was a church that I heard about, I know about, they'll remain anonymous. They had a big balcony. It was a good distance away from the platform. It was a big auditorium, maybe 1,000 people could sit in it. And one Sunday, the pastor came in on a zip line from the balcony onto the platform. So every once in a while, he'd do something real flashy. Okay, don't do that too often, but he had an opportunity. He got attention that morning for sure. A good beginning is a strong step toward a strong conclusion, meaning you're engaging him. Hear that C, don't apologize for anything. I've got an article here that somebody put together a number of years ago, how not to begin a sermon. And it fits into this do not apologize. Here's some suggestions. How not to begin a sermon. You get up and say, I'm sorry, I didn't have any time to prepare. Oh, well then why are we even here? Go home, do some more preparation. Or another one, I've been busy this week. So we're all busy. What are you trying to tell me? This is a sinker of a sermon? The other extreme would be I have 17 points I'd like to share with you. It'd scare them all off. Or another one, I'm sure we all remember what Athanasius once said to Theodoret of Peoria. Okay, who is Athanasius? We've heard that one. Theodoret of Peoria? All right, so anyway, he's illustrating, you jump into something that people are not familiar with, you're going to lose them. Every once in a while, a preacher, and we're going to say it too, we're going to get up and say, this is a hard sermon to preach. Okay, don't do that too often. Not every sermon is hard to preach, but every sermon is hard to preach. I understand that we could say it of every sermon, but he's arguing if we're doing it every other time, it won't have the impact. But yet to say it, it's hard. Why is it hard? Well, because I'm dealing with issues in my life that I know that are hard to do, and maybe they are in your life too. Okay, we're going to say that. Or it's hard because we're in a culture that says the total opposite. So you got to clarify. Here's another good one. I don't feel well this morning. So what are you do? Throw up all over the pulpit, or what does that mean? So shoot. I got up and preached once I was the pastor, preaching regularly every Sunday, and I lost my voice on Saturday. I mean, totally lost my voice. And I got up, and there's no way to get a person to substitute, at the last minute. So I got up. Fortunately, I had a microphone, and I said, "This is my voice this morning. It's only this," So I had to work with the sound guy to make sure I sounded halfway decent. Or here's another one. He says, "What not to say? I'm not sure what God wants me to say." So then, is this a surprise? Like a Cracker Jack's box? What's the surprise in there? Okay, good points that he makes that we all run into. This final one, D, or this point D, there's no E there. Good. We must not assume expectancy. Now, there's several angles. People aren't necessarily expecting anything with the sermon. They just came to Sunday regularly. But a big part of the expectancy is just their life. What happened before the service, before they got there. Their minds might be thinking, oh, what's going to happen afterwards? So they're sort of hoping, I hope this is sort of a harmless sermon and we can get done quickly because I really got to go. So we can't assume expectancy. So our introduction has to raise that need that this is important for you to spend the next 35 minutes listening to what God has to say. And I could say those words, but I want to say them in different ways. As well as for the mom, and I say it for the mom because my wife, as I've been a preacher, my wife's sitting there with all 5 of our kids when they were young, and they were crawling all over her. And her mind was not engaged with the introduction. So I really had to think of the context of the people there. Ethan, you asked in your text, and I'm going to say it for everybody here, for Eli and Ben as well. When we come to preach next week, just wear your normal college clothes. You don't have to dress up in a tie or anything, or whatever attire is in your church normally that you think of. That's not what we need to do here. We're here to learn a skill, so I'm not worried about that. So dress normally for college class here at Calvary. What were we just talking about? Oh, the congregation. Think of a normal congregation. Who would you normally be preaching to? Ben, Eli, Ethan? That's just the assumed, we're just a normal church that you're speaking to. If you want to do something differently, which is totally acceptable, I said that to Ethan there in his text and he asked about this, meaning if you want to say, hey, I'd like to talk to a college, I'd like to talk to my peers. Well, great. Just tell us as you begin the sermon, I'm really hoping to present this to the college group at my church or here at Calvary sometime. I hope I could speak in chapel. And that's a possibility now that you guys are taking the preaching class. That's a possibility this next spring that, I might call on you to preach there, or you might have opportunities, So maybe you want to do that. And that's your audience. And that helps us to understand our expectation of illustrations that you use and why you use them and how the tone is. Maybe it's a men's group. You have an opportunity. I'm the leader of the men's groups here at our church, and we have a Saturday morning breakfast. And we usually ask a guy to do a devotional there, which mini sermon type thing. And it could be that context. When you get up to speak all 5 of the times, if you want to have a specific context, just tell us before you preach, and then we'll adapt with you. Remember, an effective introduction commands attention. That's not volume and voice or stamping or jumping up and down, Ethan. Don't do that. but it is engaging their mind, getting them to say, okay, I really need to hear this. An effective introduction uncovers, reveals, raises need. When you start, people listen because they ought to listen, but before long, you have to motivate them to listen because they can't help but listen. That's a quote from Robinson. An effective introduction introduces the body of the sermon. It orients us to the subject, the topic, the question, and or reveals the points that we're going to cover if we feel that's a significant thing they need to know up front. An introduction must exhibit other characteristics: contemporary, personal, short. How long should an introduction be? Robinson recommends no more than 10%. So you're preaching, I'm asking you guys, you definitely got 20 to 25, 30 minutes even. We definitely have that amount of time here. You don't have to go that long. If you're at least 15 to 20 minutes, that would be a good sermon. But think of the introduction there. If it's a 20-minute sermon, that's 10%. I only got 2 minutes. Now, that's a general rule of thumb, but that's a good rule of thumb to think of. Conclusion, 5%. Well, just about a minute to bring it to close. Don't promise in the introduction more than the sermon delivers. Wow, this is going to be the most life-convicting. Could be, maybe not. Be careful with those. And humor. Handle that with care. And the best rule of thumb with using humor in the introduction is that which seems natural, comes out of real life. Don't just tell a joke to tell a joke. People that can use humor in sermons, they really are, and do it well, have worked at it. Because what humor does, it relaxes the listener. And usually you're using well, you could use it anywhere in a sermon, but usually you're using humor to relax people because it's a tough topic, or you relax them in order to say a significant directive statement. Will you do that? You've just illustrated in the humorous where they're laughing and they get the point. Oh, you're really talking about my life. Let's think of one other thing with humor. Lost it for a second. In the introduction of a sermon that's a tough topic, for example, you're going to get up and talk with just a normal congregation about the issue of abortion, transgender. Would you be humorous there? No. Would a tone of humor, if it's appropriate without demeaning anybody, meaning something like, this is one of those sermons I can get fired on, I don't know if I'd say that, but it's everybody's going, oh, we're going to get into some tough topics, so I sort of got to put my seatbelt on. But you're sensitive to the fact that I might be stiff-arming you as you're giving your sermon, might be wanting to ask you a bunch of tough questions. I did a devotional once at a college group, at a college, Christian college, quasi-Christian college. Christian in denominational connection by background. It was an InterVarsity group there, so it was a Christian group there at the school. But I knew I was talking about marriage and sexuality, human sexuality, and all those issues, and I knew there was a lot of flack that I could have gotten with it, and I did. I just really did, and I did afterwards. But I tried to position that I'm going to talk about a tough topic, but hopefully, you'll at least listen and consider the things that I'm saying. So I used a little humor, but it wasn't jokes, what I'm saying. So use that carefully. Some of us are a little bit better with that because we practiced it or it just seems more natural. I've got to work at it. So that's one of those things I got to write out. Here's a suggested order, and here's the chart from Donald Sanukian. We engage. We start with that personal illustration or a real life context that raises a need, curiosity, and it's oriented to the message. Then I focus on the message either by saying the main idea, the sermon idea, deductively, or I raise the question, meaning in the engage, I've told a little story about somebody. What would you do in a situation like that? What should a Christian do? Yeah, all right, so there's the question. Or the topic. God wants us to talk about this, and you say the topic inductively. You set the stage biblically, and that's talking about the context, the background, the setting, meaning we're going to go into the Bible because the Bible talks directly about this topic. It's in Genesis chapter 22, and so you set the tone. And here's Sanukian's words, preview the coming hunks. I use the word hunk, I don't know. But that's what he calls them. The direction of the message taken, you're talking about listing the points that you're going to talk about. Announce the passage, wait for them to find it, read it, or dive into it, because they're coming back to the passage that have been read. And here's determining if a preview, that step 4 is needed. I was talking about, I'll let you all read that. How do we go up to the platform and the pulpit is important. You go up, set your Bible down, take a pause and make sure your notes are straight, look at people in the eye and start your first sentence, captivate, connect with them quickly, not stumbling around. You got to think of those initial words, and there's where the manuscript's good. The introduction must at the very least introduce the subject, so no one needs to guess what the preacher's going to talk about. Keep the length appropriate, 10%. Use humor carefully. Question, comment, anybody? Instruct the conclusion. Churches are littered with debris. I like what Dr. Miller here from Calvary said. He was preaching classes before I got him, so I took it right out of his notes. Churches are littered with debris from sermons that self-destructed as they attempted to land. They took off without a hitch, soared for 30 glorious minutes above the biblical landscape, only to crash between the pulpit and the nearest exit. They didn't finish well. It's the most neglected aspect of teaching and preaching. Directly or indirectly, the conclusion answers the question, so what? What's next? If it was in a sermon with my purpose to understand, now that we understand it, God wants to change our lives. Maybe you need to sit down and talk with somebody about the implications practically, personally about this. So you're nudging them to the next step. If it was to convince them, then you'd lead them in a word of prayer for sure. Let me step back to the conclusion for a sermon that's to understand. In your prayer, it would be, Lord, we understand that. Show us what to do. In your talking, it's, God gave us truth to change our lives. I didn't have the time to talk about all the practical implications. Come back next week. Come tonight. Some churches do that. Some pastors do that. They have a Sunday evening service. I'm going to give the practical applications in the evening or Wednesday night, wherever he has an appropriate context afterwards. But you want to nudge them to action, take the next step, and keep asking questions now. Now that you understand it, what are you to do with it? Now that you know how, will you? What's your plan? And we either talk briefly in our conclusion, we definitely pray, not the points we're wanting to say, but we pray, we've heard it, Lord, give us the resolve to do things. And again, don't preach your sermon in that prayer again. I like to listen to people's prayers and my own prayer after a sermon and see how they go. I want to pray to the Lord, not re-talk to the people. Review your material on the homiletical purpose of the sermon. And that's where we're reviewing on it's to understand, or it's to convince, or it's to apply, show how. The function of the conclusion, we have one more of the following. And you can see what he's listed here, Robinson, to restate the sermon idea, drive home specific applications, summarize, pull loose ends together. We don't add anything new. Rather, we're trying to help comprehend that sermon idea and its implications. Expository preaching is the explaining of the truth of a text with the personal application shown, and then provide ways and means of specific courses of actions. Add no new material, make it clear and specific, see that it reflects the demands of the passage. Avoid being prolonged, be direct, brief. Don't crash between the pulpit and the first pew. Once you begin a conclusion, avoid lapsing back into the message. And an additional point, whatever, call for change, call for specific decisions. And here's some specific elements that you could use. Illustration would be sometimes that which you began in the beginning, you've used it perhaps for the sermon, and now you bring an appropriate conclusion. One of the things that you can see there, I'm going to read them all through. Added in the final thing, a title. Don't spend too much time on the title. It's an aid to the preacher. Here's people get an idea of the topic. Sometimes in a practical sermon where you're doing how, you're going to go something like, how to be a doer of the word. Okay. Don't be worried about being too creative. Just put out that main idea and put it in your title. Sometimes that works. Other times you're asking a question. It reflects the sermon idea. It's not necessarily mentioned. I mean, you don't say it in the sermon. It's something that people see to raise the curiosity. Use thought-provoking creative language that arouses curiosity while suggesting the actual content. And then samples, where there's samples all over the place that you can see. Questions, anybody? Either of you? All right, so come back next week.
I had a question. Sorry.
Yes.
I know some preachers will like hand out their notes or like do slides. Do you want us to do anything like that, or it's just preach?
Good point. Ethan asked about that too. I'm not asking you to do anything. Just come and preach. That's our task here. In the next class, 332, I'm going to ask the students that are there to do some form of media. And if that means a handout, PowerPoint, I'm going to ask you to use an object, maybe a video clip, at least 2 of them through the 6 sermons that you do in that class. For this class, if you want to do it, I'm not going to restrict you, but don't take the time, worry about that. You don't have to. Don't need a handout, don't need a PowerPoint. But if you're already adept at that and that helps you, use it well, a little bit more learning, but you don't have to.
Okay, thanks.
Good. Well, next week we'll preach the sermons. We'll be in class 6 o'clock, East Ed 105, 106. Ethan, if you could make it, great. If you can't and you have to record the sermon, just record it and I'll show it in class.
Okay. I'll do my best. I've already asked for it off, and so it's just a matter of I can get someone to pick it up for me. But I'll keep you posted on it because I really want to come in person just because I want to get that feel for it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll keep you posted on it, and so I think again with a week I should be able to get it off, but we'll see.
It maybe if your job means you can have an hour off or a half hour off, and you want to do it live. Well, we have the ability to do that through Teams. You got your computer and you set it in front of you. Sort of a hokey setting, but it can be done. I have one seminary student that he had to record all of his sermons, and he did it in this little hallway. It had all the family pictures, and he began his first sermon. He did all 6 of them there. He said, "Welcome to the Church of the Hall."
That's funny.
So anyway, I had another guy. It was in Minnesota or Michigan up there. Had his dog. Yeah, I noticed your dog there. Kept walking through, and that was his congregation. Was his dog. It was the funniest thing. But we had a good time. But hopefully you can make it.
Yeah, no, I was doing some presentation for a class recording, and I was doing that at my table, and I had the door kind of like somewhat open so that she could look out, but she saw a squirrel and she started barking like right during this presentation, and I'm like, I am so sorry. She's not much of a barker, but apparently when she sees squirrels, she barks. She hates squirrels.
She's a squirrel dog. Squirrel dog. Now, Ethan, here's another class for TH220. You're in that, and you're going to introduce a topic.
Yep. I gotta do that for Thursday.
And,
Yep.
And are you going to do that? You're not going to be able to come live. You're going to record it, so I'll show it.
Record it. Yeah.
Okay, do that. Post it, and I'll show it then in class there on Thursday or next week sometime.
Yeah.
Whenever you're up. I don't remember.
Yeah.
Well,
I
have a
think
good
it's,
one, guys.
I think it's Thursdays. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I just read your name today when I was doing the class. I haven't uploaded the file yet. But have a good one, guys.
Yep. Have a good
All right,
one.
you
Good
too.
night.
Thank you.
Take
Good night.
care.
Yep.